Spacegroup recently moved from eastern Oslo to the west part of the city. Was the neighbor a criteria for the new office, and how important is the surrounding for you for a creative firm?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because the kind of new office in many ways is really in this incredibly pulsating, dynamic part of the city, and for working here, suddenly everything is within an arm's reach, and that makes it super attractive. It's easy for us to get all of the kind of resources we need for the day-to-day operations. So that is a super attractive condition. What's also interesting is that both places were, let's call them, creative hubs as buildings. But what I realize and kind of discover more and more is that that kind of intelligence needs to be managed, because it's not enough just to put creative people in a building and assume that there's going to be some kind of interaction between them. We, we didn't know more or less anyone in the last building we were in at all. Here, there's a much kind of more interesting vibe, partly because the owner of the building is really carefully putting together these pieces. He'd rather wait half a year to get the right people here. Created a great condition because he wanted Spacegroup here. And that helps. So having that right attitude, that right kind of approach. But I really do think there will be people who will be creative managers, taking all of these nerdy, brilliant, artistic people, bringing them to kind of together and finding ways to create this unexpected kind of catalyst, and hopefully to the degree that you start to get these autocatalytic processes. So I think there will be a kind of future role for people to somehow manage that creativity. So the new office, but the new office is, it's great, and the location is kind of amazing, and for sure that was a criteria to look for. But also then coming into a creative hub and having the right owner, it was the mix that made it the ideal situation for us to be in.
And so, on a smaller scale, on the scale of the office, would you argue that the physical environment of the office is important for your work? And what do you think is the ideal workspace in terms of architecture?
Yeah, I mean, there's some basic things that are always important for us, like great daylighting. We have the whole floor of the building, we have light on front side, back side, we get morning, evening. So that in itself undeniably is important. On the other hand, also, what is interesting in this space is that it's a really interesting mix between, I know everyone romanticizes this idea of the big industrial space, raw, kind of cool, water dripping from and I did that in the 90s in Berlin. It was great. But, on the other hand, what you really need is, in a kind of creative environment, is you really want lots of different kinds of spaces, because there's so many different kinds of events that you don't even know until a person walks in the door. And I say a group of people come in the door, and I'm at any given moment saying, oh yeah, we need to go into that space, or that space, or that space. And sometimes in the middle of the meeting, we'll move and switch and go to another space, because the way that meeting is evolving is also changing. So to have a number of different kinds of spaces that varies between spaces for physical, kind of, let's say, physical group processes working together in a kind of workshop environment, to have a theoretical or intellectual discussion about something, to meet, over coffee and have a kind of light brainstorm about something, to create really radically different spaces, I think is essential. And spaces that are not just radically different, but spaces that also can be radically transformed at any given moment. So to build that into the design of a space, and that's the thing, we come from this background of the white box, and if you have the white box, like in a museum, then you can just do anything you want, but I think there needs to be this middle ground, just as we have maybe a middle ground between kind of corporate and creative. There's also, for us, this middle ground between the white box, where anything can happen, and the defined box, where you really start to have spaces that are highly performant. You want them
and you define Spacegroup as a broad collective intelligence-based office. How do you think that this idea is reflected in your office space?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to take a step back, what I think is when you say broad collective intelligence, what is incredibly interesting, we're in Norway, and Norway is, let's say, somehow off the main, let's say, the main route. We're not in the, we're not in the Gulf Stream of creativity. Partly because of, and partly because just of its physical distance from say Central Europe, if I can call it that. So, and we're in this current situation where, with the way the aging of the population in Europe, there are just less and less people in the workforce. So, one thing that I'm really fascinated about is how do you attract talent? Of course, you attract talent by doing great work. People gravitate towards that. People still choose, if they have to choose between their personal pleasure and where they want to live and things, that's a priority often before work and money. So the workspace is incredibly important on the one hand in terms of attracting, almost marketing your office. If people want to work in a space where people feel good. And then how do you kind of do that? What kind of conditions do you create to make people feel, this is the space I want to be in? And that goes from everything. Number one, it goes from participation, meaning that people can be involved in designing their environment. I think it also goes in relationship to, on one hand, it's in a creative environment. We work hard. Sometimes we work long hours. There's a lot of friction. You're dealing in a profession where you're both putting your brain and your heart on the line at the same time. And within that tension, you always want to juxtapose that with a lot of fun and a certain amount of casualness as well. So an environment that kind of, I think, considers both of those factors, environment where you can enjoy yourself and have a certain degree of comfort next to, comfort and play, let's say, next to this kind of intensity and this friction. I think those contrasts are incredibly important. And that's something we try to do in our space, and we try to kind of create hybrid spaces where, a meeting room is a library, and we try to have a certain amount of irony and kind of playfulness in the design. The chairs in our meeting room here are the Obama chairs that were designed by a crazy artist that we know named Jupp Nieshout. So they always bring people in and say, this is our gold room and these are our Obama chairs. So I think to have a certain amount of kind of almost self-irony and kind of humor, and that kind of starts some of this playful process, to engage that everyone can influence their environment, I think is important. And when people start to influence their environment, it starts to become, a collective environment that everyone feels ownership to. And that, I think, is incredibly important, that idea of ownership in space.
You hold what you call on the house every 2 weeks with inviting artists or people from the office just speaking. And what do you think that how can culture, art, and entertainment fit the creativity of an office?
Creativity is it's organic and it's kind of growing, and it needs kind of in a way to be constantly fed. And that, that's incredible. If you don't, it just kind of stagnates and it will start to atrophy. And so to avoid that kind of creative atrophy, we're always looking for ways to bring in new impulses, new ideas. And, and I'm very kind of critical to the kind of surfing kind of like world, the thumbs up world that we're kind of living in, and it's a very kind of superficial, and we're looking for always more depth to explore the platforms of research analysis. And research is incredibly important to us, and the workspace should catalyze that research and create an environment for that. And there are different ways to do it. Like you said, the On the House is an event which both people in the office give lectures to the rest of the office about subjects they're interested in, forces them to prepare and kind of discuss ideas. And discussing ideas in an open forum always makes you distill them differently and formulate yourself differently. And it's an incredible learning process, like giving a lecture. we invite guests from the outside that we think will kind of open up new kind of perceptions, whether it's perceptions about space or whether it's perceptions about social conditions and context. So I think, those types of things, every Monday we sit down and have a quite theoretical discussion about issues that are maybe indirectly related to our projects. They could be related to events that are happening, kind of current affairs and things happening in the world. We always are able to make that link. But in general, it's really important for us to create a number of, let's say, non-standard kind of events that inject new capital, intellectual capital into the office. And that helps with this collective intelligence that we talked about, and this kind of group of people who are really coming from all over the world. It allows, it introduces different kinds of intellectual capital into the working environment and into the kind of complex relationships that we want to create. Ultimately, we're always looking for ways to bring different people in the office together in different configurations with different circumstances, meeting projects or clients, and to see how those things can become a kind of an ecology that builds and grows and cultivates intelligence. And that's ultimately what is important for us in a kind of creative environment.
How did you think and design the social areas of your office, and what qualities are important for you in these areas?
I think an important quality for those kind of spaces is a certain amount of spaces that allow for promiscuity. Promiscuity in the sense that, space that is unpredictable and differentiated and changing, and spaces that are kind of, mixing together in a way that you don't normally expect. I think we don't have even the budget to have a canteen and a living room and a reception area, and so if those types of spaces don't start to kind of mix together in a way that you'll get kind of hybrid spaces out of them, I think it's super important. And that then allows us to do kind of totally different things in there. We can have a party and open up the whole middle of the office and start dancing. We can have breakout sessions and sit there and continue in some of these interstitial spaces. And I think it's very clear that also different people gravitate or have different needs towards different spaces. I like to meet in the sofa area, and when people are sitting in that kind of configuration, they respond differently. You're totally different than when you're sitting upright in the Obama chair like you're sitting in. You respond entirely differently. So that's also very interesting to see how you can take one process and put it in 4 or 5 different environments, and how, depending on the environment you put it in, the way that process will develop can be significantly different. And I'm always kind of fascinated by that, and it's almost worth to kind of make a test and do a discussion in 5 different spaces. And in many of our cases, we'll start a meeting in one place, and then realize we want something else out of that meeting and move it to another place, and then realize, okay, now we got that, now we want to do something different with it, move it to a third space. That's a kind of interesting to have that ability in a creative environment to change like that, to kind of move like that. At the same time, the openness in our space. Now we have a space that is Miesian in the sense that there are different rooms, but they're all connected. There's a fluidity in the environment which we like, which we want. So there's visual privacy, but there's a fluidity, and that balance is super important. And what's really nice that I see happening is sometimes there might be a passionate discussion going on one side of the office, and then the person sitting on the other end, you see their ears slowly popping up, and then leaning over, and then walking over, and then before you know it, they're pulled into the fire. And I think that's really important in the creative environment, so it's that balance that you can both disconnect and connect. pulled into. And there are three totally different things that happen in those circumstances. And so individual work processes, group work process, kind of exchange work processes, I think are super important. And the space really kind of should cultivate that. And that's what I like about our space, is that I see it kind of happening. And in a certain way, it doesn't need to be curated. It happens naturally. So in that sense, space is incredibly important.
Thank you.
Thank you.